Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Before we begin this episode, I want to alert you that my latest book is now available in both print and ebook formats. The title is Love American Style, and it is a collection of short stories about men, women, their passions, and their dysfunctions. There's a short link in the episode notes that will take you to my Amazon profile page, where all 4 of my books are listed, 3 novels in this new short story collection. Again, the title of the new one is Love American Style, named after the TV series that ran from 1969 until 1974. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Tom Zoellner, the author of 9 nonfiction books, including Island on Fire, The Revolt That Ended Slavery in the British Empire, which is the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for the Best Nonfiction Book of 2020 and a finalist for the Bancroft Prize and the California Book Award. He works as a professor at Chapman University and Dartmouth College and as editor-at-large for the Los Angeles Review of Books. His writing has appeared in The Atlantic and Harper's, The American Scholar, The Oxford American, Time, Foreign Policy, Men's Health, Slate. The list goes on, also including the Los Angeles and the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and publications beyond that. He is a former staff writer at the Arizona Republic and at the San Francisco Chronicle, and the recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Lannan Foundation. Tom Zoellner, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. I see that, your territories and mine overlap a bit. Did you grow up in Tucson? Is that home to you?
I did indeed grow up in Tucson, Arizona.
Where'd you go to college from there? Were you a Wildcat, University of Arizona Wildcat?
Briefly, I spent a freshman year there, and it just wasn't for me. So I transferred to a school in the Midwest, Lawrence University.
Lawrence University, okay. And then I noticed I was very interested to see you spend time at the Arizona Republic. I had spent years in Arizona, Arizona State grad myself, but from the Northeast originally. Was when you were at the Republic, was Tom Fitzpatrick there at the time, the columnist, or had he already gone over to New Times?
Fitzpatrick was at the New Times, and he had certainly carved out an identity as a hard-hitting Chicago guy who took no crap from anyone.
Yeah, even his column mug, which was a stipple, had an angry face on it. It was just like, don't mess with Tom Fitzpatrick. But when he went over to the New Times, though, he seemed to soften up. But not that he wasn't cracking skulls. It was just it didn't seem that he was putting as much effort in. Did you ever meet the man?
I never did. His reputation preceded him, though.
Yes. What about you're familiar with New Times? I don't know if you ever crossed paths with Mike Lacey, one of the co-founders and the editor.
Yeah, so I did. Lacey has had some legal problems, to say the least. I was asked to do a story on his arc, such as it was, from revolutionary to defendant in Phoenix Magazine for an issue a couple months ago.
What are his legal problems? I'm not up to date on that.
Lacey and Jim Larkin, who were co-founders of New Times when it was a kind of a radical alternative paper started out of Arizona State University. They went on to found something called Backpage, which was where all the advertisements for Vice, outcall
Right.
services, that sort of thing.
I remember it. So
Yeah,
didn't they sell the newspaper, but they retained Backpage? Had gone online by then and they retained that. Is that correct?
correct. And the federal government alleged that this was a front for sex trafficking. And what followed was a long legal soap opera, which eventually resulted in one conviction out of a number of counts. And the conviction, if I remember correctly, was for alleged money laundering.
Wow. That is some legal trouble there. Um, you remember back in the day, I mean, Janet Boomersbach was kind of the face of New Times back when it was first busting out. I mean, after Lacey and Larkin had started the magazine, she just died, what, a week ago or something like that, just days ago. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yes, God rest her soul. Jana was wonderful. Always friendly, generous. A lot of institutional knowledge there. She wasn't afraid of asking questions of powerful people, and also a darn good historian in her own right.
Yeah, she wrote some books herself. Um, Now, you got into the book writing business. How long, I mean, how long ago was it, Tom, that you decided that you wanted to be a writer?
Oh boy.
And
I
was this a
suppose,
childhood thing or junior
yeah, I
high or
guess it
what?
was a
Not
childhood
until,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, probably at Lookout Mountain Elementary School in North Phoenix, Arizona, which is where the uh, somewhat troubling idea first began to form that maybe this could be a credible way to try and make a life.
Troubling in what regard?
Well, I mean, even then, even to a grade schooler, it was apparent that this was going to be hardly a an easy economic path. Uh, there was a series of books called Harriet the Spy. You're probably familiar
Oh
with
yeah,
them.
that's yes. In fact, that's a major, that's an important book from my past. This is only the second time I've heard it on the podcast, but yes. What did that do for you?
Well, there was a character there that the author Louise Fitzhugh had created. Harriet's friend Sport had a father who was a writer who was a divorced guy, and the way that she portrayed this guy's life was just one of tortured economic precarity. And this guy like took naps in the middle of the day and had nightmares, and there was a line in there that um, Harriet guessed that being a writer meant having a lot of nightmares, and he could never find any money to take care of his son. And I think that was Fitzhugh's way of sort of warning off younger readers from the idea that they should be writing for a living.
Now, how did your desire to write books develop? How did you prep yourself? Did you go through any kind of formal training? Did you do workshops, or was it the sort of thing that you did some newspaper work, understood how to report, how to structure a story? Obviously, a story and a book are two different things, but how did you really see yourself developing to the point where you wrote your first one?
Sure. Well, um, joining the staff of a metropolitan newspaper used to be a thing that was possible. This was a way to ask questions about the world, write about the world, granted in a somewhat form of enforced mediocrity. That is to say, the 10-inch, 12-inch news story, inverted pyramid. It's brutal and efficient, and sometimes it can strip the color away from your prose, but it's a way to make a living, which I did. And until the vitality slowly began to go out of the business. The ambition and the staffs were shrinking. I could kind of read the writing on the wall, and I left the Arizona Republic in 2003 after just a period of, I suppose, existential drifting, unhappiness, so forth. It was then that I got put in touch with a literary agent who encouraged the writing of a book proposal about the diamond business, which that resulted in eventually in my first book called The Heartless Stone.
Now, back up a minute to the disillusionment with the newspaper business. You sounds like you were saying, the momentum was being lost. Now, did this coincide with the advent of or the rise of the internet?
Yes, certainly. The pillar of the prosperity of newspapers rested on classified ads. That was approximately 60% of their income. This is where the money had always lain in newspapers since the early 19th century. Some local apothecary wants to put in an ad for a new potion down at the at the drugstore, and you put it in the newspaper, and that's how it makes money. And news and information is what draws people into that economic product. If with the advent of digitized classified ads, Craigslist, and so forth. The need to advertise your lawnmower in the newspaper, the need to advertise your used Buick, that was gone in a shockingly compressed period of time. It didn't take a generation for this to land. It took only 7 to 10 years for the effects really to be felt.
Yeah. They just disappeared. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that a full page of classified ads, and remember back in the day there were pages of them, were brought in more revenue than a full page display ad bought by, some big advertiser. You didn't have to pay a lot for the classified ad, but when you added up all the lines on that page on a broadsheet newspaper, it really added up to a lot of money. But it made so much sense that it would go online because it was so much it was searchable instead of just looking for the headline and then going down ad by ad looking for what you're looking for. But it was devastating. It was really killed off a tremendous amount of the newspaper business. I mean, literally
Sure. And
driving
all
some of them
those,
out of business.
yes, all those executives, by the way, that paid themselves such handsome salaries at media corporations such as Gannett, they should have seen this coming. They could have gotten ahead of it somehow. They could have put their branding on it and made free classifieds, free searchable digitized classifieds, part of the portfolio of what newspapers were doing. And instead, they completely lost control of it. And so that's, I think, a part of my historic resentment of newspaper company executives, not just for the, stingy vision they had for the news, but also their incompetence when it came to forecasting these trends.
Yeah, it's was really one of those situations where they had a model that worked and they didn't see the train coming straight at them. They should have, like you said. It was obvious. It was obvious if you spent any time on it, just looking at the threats to your business. But that was, I mean, really, the internet kind of launched a whole new threat assessment. Industries, I mean, you even see Kodak that didn't see digital coming and got wiped out. No, that's no excuse for the newspaper industry or for Kodak for that matter. But it was one of those deals where disruption just became so prevalent, and the newspaper people, yeah, they were not prepared at
Hmm.
all.
Hmm.
So the first book on the diamond trade, tell me about how did that, you wrote the book proposal, your agent liked what he or she saw, obviously found a publishing house that said, we'll do this one. What do you think the key was to that? What was it about the number one, the diamond trade? Why is that so interesting to the publishing company and potential readers? And then what was it? Is there anything about your proposal that you think kind of nailed it?
Well, I had borrowed a lot of money to go over to Africa to do the reporting. I had never been there before. This is the place where I reported the first chapter was one of the true tragedy spots on the continent, a place called the Central African Republic, former French colony that had been the subject of just heartless extraction on the part of the French with very little thought to infrastructure, transportation, education. The nation post-independence had been racked by a series of coups. Um, uh, Income was about at that time $1 per day per capita income, and it was a big harbor for diamond smuggling because it lay across the river from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a lot of the diamonds were taken out of a war zone and given a clean provenance. This is during a time when the industry was waking up to the image threat from what are called blood diamonds, which is to say, stones that are mined in a war zone and whose sale is used to finance the ongoing prosecution of the war. But it's very easy to get around the self-policing protocols that the diamond industry had developed as a in response. And the book attempted to show not just the myriad holes in that um, in that case, but also get into the history of the diamond, why it had been regarded as a token of love, how they're sold, how they're polished, how they become these empty chambers for the projection of our desires.
Mm. And the title of that book is The Heartless Stone for our listeners. The title is The Heartless Stone, A Journey Through the World of Diamonds, Deceit, and Desire. You have written about a lot of really interesting subjects, Tom. You write about trains, riding the rails that created the modern world. You've written about Island on Fire, I mentioned during the intro, that had to do with the ending of slavery in the British Empire. You've got one about Arizona called Rim to River, which I assume is the south rim of the Grand Canyon to the Rio Grande. Um, and then you've got one on uranium. You also have one called the National Road, Dispatches from a Changing America. Is part of the attraction to your to writing books about these subjects that um, it's a personal adventure for you? For instance, with the train book, I believe you rode a lot of trains, correct, around the world to do your research on that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What attracted you to? I mean, I love trains myself, so it's kind of a question I could almost answer. But what attracted you to trains to the extent that you wanted to do an entire book?
Well, the root of it was in a phone call, actually. A friend of mine, a guy named Mark Herman, and I were talking one day, and he just sort of asked the question, which is a fairly common question: why are European nations so well wired when it comes to getting around, not just ordinary suburban business commuting, but also being able to get from major cities to the countryside with at low cost and with little trouble. Why isn't the United States like that when the United States was the world leader in railroads in the late 19th, early 20th century? And said, "Gosh, I don't know. Historically, I don't know the answer to that question." And it led to an idea of charting rail travel as a force in global society that determined the shape of our cities, the sound of our music, the way wars are fought, food production, the way cities are laid out. All kinds of things can be attributed to this tremendous economic and social force of the railroad. And the book was structured as a series of journeys that would try and explain that. For example, the story about the birth of the steam engine and the smooth wheels on smooth rails, reported from Britain, an end-to-end journey from the very north end of the main island of Britain all the way to Land's End in Cornwall.
Now, is there a global standard in terms of the rails in the width of them? The reason I even asked this question, Tom, well, a couple reasons. One of which is normally once we start to talk about these things, for instance, technology of any kind, it seems that now we start to say we should probably standardize this so it could be more widespread and everybody's playing on the same field. But also, one of the things I learned about the whole invasion of Ukraine is that Russia had their rails at a wider or narrower, I believe it was a wider width, so that an enemy state could not just come rolling into, into their country on a train or use their rail system as part of their method of attack.
Yes, the gauge wars are a tremendous parable for understanding not just that sort of military defensive maneuver that you mentioned, but also corporate monopolistic dominance. The way that in the early days of the railroad, the standard gauge, as it was called, set by George Stephenson, was 4 feet 8.5 inches, which is still the standard gauge in the US. But some companies deviated from this in order to make it so that competitors would not be able to use engines and carriages on their tracks. This was also a way to prevent that invasion by a railroad, which what a scary thing to have an invading power commandeer your tracks. And so, famously, Spain, uh, in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars, decided to not just mount up, hide behind the natural barrier of the Pyrenees, but also gauge its tracks in such a way that was did not conform to the French system.
Hmm.
Mongolia and China have to this day the same disunion in the matter of gauge.
Now, in terms of the United States, we move a lot of product by rail, but passenger travel is not what it is in, say, European countries. This is part of the calculus in writing the book. What did you discover anything? I mean, when it comes to rail to um, to cargo via rail, is the United States as developed as any other country in the world? But then it's the passenger rail system that we really don't seem to have a lot of affinity for.
Yes, that's exactly correct. Uh, Cargo rail is very efficient in the United States in a way that it's not in Great Britain, where most of the goods are transported by truck, by lorry. It's the passenger rail that is really, by global standards, certainly an embarrassment in the United States.
What happened with passenger rail? I mean, if we developed a rail system and it was a source of national pride, why did we not see that moving people made a lot of sense as well? Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was always um, a bit of a loss leader for the U.S. rails because of the way that you need to service passengers in a way that you don't need to service cargo. Passengers have biological needs. They can be unpredictable, whereas there's a predictability to freight. What happened was after World War II, uh, Europe was, of course, in smithers. Many of the tracks had been bombed. There was a massive package of global financial aid aimed at rebuilding the European continent, and this money got uh, distributed to existing bureaucracies that were able to handle it. And in Europe, uh, France, Germany, etc., enormous resources, political prestige was tied up in the rail ministries. So when it came to accepting these bags of money, that was a natural place for it to go, and to repair all of these vital connectors between cities, which had been left ruined. The United States did not have that problem. There was no need to rebuild ruined tracks. There was a need, however, to uh, connect growing suburbs with city cores with something efficient and flexible, that is the automobile. Um, Detroit had a big lobbying presence in Washington. The Texas oil industries were flexing an enormous amount of clout, and they worked together to convince Eisenhower and the Congress of the need for a federal interstate system. Certainly, Eisenhower wanted it for his own reasons, which is to say the fast evacuation of cities in the event of a nuclear attack. And he famously had been impressed by the German Autobahns when he was a young general right after World War One, crossing the European continent.
Interesting. So, let me ask you about your book, The National Road. The subtitle, again, is Dispatches from a Changing America. It's a really divided time in America. A lot of people feel like the country is changing, maybe changing too rapidly, not changing for the best. Give us a sketch of the book. What did you discover in terms of how things are changing in America?
Well, in a number of ways. I've got a chapter there on Dollar General stores, the rise of what's called little box retail as opposed to big box retail. These kinds of really impressively laid out successors to the five and dime, which you see in small towns across the United States that have lost their Main Street merchants. And it's a real mixed blessing. I mean, this does get cheap goods into the hands of people who don't have a lot of money to spend on basic items. But if Dollar General's moving into your town, it's generally not a good sign. They tend to target declining communities. That's a way that the United States is changing. Another way is that we're just not moving around as much as we used to. Today's Americans have changed zip codes at a lower rate than almost any time in our history since the 1920s.
Why is that?
We're tending to stay in place. This is the flexibility of work on the internet, for one thing. For another thing, it's the stagnation of wages, the ways that people tend to struggle to find work in some of these declining areas, and they just don't move out of them.
Hmm. Interesting. So, how did that idea come about?
I just had all these ideas about the United States that I had witnessed during my years as a newspaper reporter, and it just seemed like I wanted to put it between two covers. Um, um, all of these disparate, almost impressionistic portraits of this incredible place that we call the United States. One of my greatest influences is a former reporter, actually, for the Chicago Daily News, a guy named John Gunther, who is best known for writing a series of books called Inside, that is, Inside Europe, Inside Africa, Inside USA. I had read Inside USA at a young age. I was in my teens, maybe. And this book was published in 1950. It was a narrative catalog of of the country, written at both a short and long distance, which is to say, it reported on, who's the governor of Kentucky, what's the state of the Florida citrus business, those sorts of things, which are obviously malleable. But he made many durable observations about the American character that really hold up through the years. And so, if that book had a an avatar, it would have been Gunther.
Hmm. Yeah, I want to ask you about one more of your books, and then I want to talk about what you teach at Chapman, how you teach at Chapman and at Dartmouth, and also talk about what you're working on now or going to be working on next. So Rim to River is the one I wanted to ask you about. It's subtitled Looking into the Heart of Arizona. Now you grew up in Tucson. You
Correct.
know and you've worked in the state. Do you know a great deal about it? Is that why you picked Arizona, or is Arizona kind of a singularly fascinating state among the 50?
Yeah, both those things are true. It's I argue that much of what happens in America or will happen in America is you can see the foretaste of it happening in Arizona. It's a place that I just have never been able to get uh, uh, out of my system. In 2019, I took it upon myself to walk across it from the north border at Utah to the southern border at Mexico. That was a journey of 790 miles, and
And you
that
walked the
was
whole thing,
I walked the whole thing.
and you did it by yourself.
Yes.
What time of year was that?
That was September to November.
Okay, so the cooler weather, but nonetheless, there's a lot of threats other than just the scorching hot summers. There's rattlesnakes and all kinds of other things. What did you um, I'm just curious whether you ran into any precarious situations along the way where you felt threatened.
No, there was one point where I came close to running out of water, which was a bit terrifying. It was out, of course, in the middle of nowhere, and I was just very, very lucky that the certain springs were flowing.
So you knew where these springs were, but they don't flow continuously.
Yes,
So you were, and this was good pure water. But you were, yeah. So you kind of lucked out at the same time.
yeah. I mean, you know where the springs are, thanks to GPS. The real X factor is whether they happen to be flowing or not, or whether they've gone dry.
So, what did you, if people were, a lot of people aren't very familiar with Arizona. They know it exists. Haven't necessarily been there. It's a state of big contrasts. I mean, you've got everything from low desert to high desert. You've got a meteor crater. You've got Flagstaff at 6,000 plus feet above sea level, and lots of skiing and cool summers, the Grand Canyon, and so on. What would you tell somebody about that particular book that kind of is maybe some of the takeaways?
Well, the walk itself is used to structure 17 essays about the place, similar to the book about the United States, just kind of a narrative portrait, you might say. I've got essays in there about copper mining, about the state's history of violence, about the novels that have been written about it, how politics really works at the state capitol, a section on the extreme partisanship of Arizona, um, all the things that non-natives should know and that natives can appreciate.
Now, would you say today the partisanship is not quite what it used to be? I mean, it's become basically a purple state, correct?
Correct, but it reflects the United States in this way that you've got suburbs turning blue and the rural areas going even more red.
Right. Yeah, we definitely see a lot of that. Were you inspired in writing that book by, and I don't know the timing on this, but Bill Bryson, who's written some terrific books, um, did one called A Walk Through the Woods. Did that inspire you at all? Was that the inspiration, or was it influential at all for you, or have you even read it?
Yeah, it's a good book. Another of Bryson's books, which doesn't get nearly enough attention, it's actually his first book called The Lost Continent, which is an account of a road trip, sort of like Blue Highways by William Least Heat Moon or Travels with Charlie. It's Bryson's own kind of motoring journey through his home country after spending a decade in Britain. It's pretty good.
Now so you're a nonfiction writer. I mean, this is actually a fiction podcast, but I have nonfiction writers on from time to time. We had the great Gay Talese on here before, and there's so much to be learned from anybody who writes, really, writes professionally. What about, and I believe, check me on this, but I believe you tried your hand at fiction writing, and just decided you like the nonfiction writing better. Was that the case? And what I'm leading towards is kind of the distinctions that you see between writing fiction and writing narrative nonfiction.
Sure. I think writing fiction is tremendously difficult. My hat is off to anyone who can do it. I certainly have tried. I don't think I have much talent for it. The creation of a verisimilitude between what's on the page and what makes sense in real life. I mean, that's very easy to do with nonfiction. You just simply, observe and depict. With fiction, that's a whole nother step. And I just don't think I've been able to convincingly pull it off.
Hmm. Gotcha. Hey, I want to get back to Arizona for a minute because one of the question I kind of vaulted over has to do with the U.S. southern border, which is such a politically loaded, well, all of our borders with Mexico. And you grew up in Tucson, you probably have a better feel for this than your average American. What are your thoughts on the U.S. southern border and this whole immigration thing we've got going on?
Oh boy. My own view, this is a tremendously complicated subject, but My own view is that it's somewhat overblown, that the border is um, been porous ever since the Gadsden Purchase of of the 1850s. That this is a vital economic lifeline, not just for laborers from uh, Central America and Mexico, but also a lifeline for the Southwest, also a lifeline for industrialized cities, for farms in North Carolina, factories in Chicago. If that were to disappear through some sort of mythological perfect enforcement, it would be a catastrophe. And so, to some extent, we live in a state of studied denial about the importance of having somewhat of a less than sealed border. Now, that isn't to say that I think open borders is necessarily a good idea. There should be some control, some form of enforcement. But the idea, certainly, and this is a very easy straw man to shoot down, the idea of an invasion of our southern border, of a poisoning of our society, that's pure nonsense.
Yeah, and that's the vernacular that we're hearing today. There is a school of thought that money flows seamlessly across borders, information flows seamlessly across borders, products flow seamlessly across borders. Obviously, there are some restrictions. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping don't allow certain information to come into their country or certain products, and so on. But by and large, all of that stuff flows freely. It is all part of the global circulatory system. And the argument is labor needs to flow freely as well because it goes to where the jobs are. And if there aren't jobs, they don't go there because there's nothing there for them. Uh, but it's not really seen um, that way in this country. And again, I'm not trying to make an argument that we should have no controls at just a open border, but it's an interesting argument that what makes an economy work, all over the economies all over the world work, is that freedom of movement of money, product, information, but not so much labor. That's where we kind of are push people push people back. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that,
Well,
Tom.
yeah, I mean, the idea that somehow we're getting ripped off, the numbers just don't show that. The fact is that migrants pay millions of dollars in taxes. Um, e- every serious study has shown that they commit crimes at a rate less than that of U.S.
Hmm.
citizens.
Hmm. And it
I
doesn't get publicized very much at all. They have
no,
much more to lose. It's kind of like if I commit a crime, now I'm a problem. I could be deported. So I have a bigger incentive not to commit any crimes. Um, and they come from a culture, I think, and oftentimes where law and order is the rule. I mean, it's supposed to be the rule everywhere, but it's not everybody's as observant about that everywhere. Anyway, go ahead, Tom. I kind of cut you off there.
no, that's you're making salient points. They come here mainly to work and for it's hard to make generalities, but most of them, their goal is to get their families back home out of poverty through the remittances, and then eventually return home. They try to keep their heads down while they're here, understandably so. And
I think there's a lot of people who don't understand what you just said, and that is that many of them want to go back to. They love their country. They want to
right,
go back. They're here for exactly the reason that you said, and eventually they decide they want to go back. I've worked with Filipino people who are here legally, and they say when I retire, I'm going back to the Philippines. It's far from an invasion. It's the opportunities here. I take advantage of that opportunity, pay my taxes. Also, keep the United States younger than a lot of other countries because we have immigration. Well, Italy and Japan and a lot of other countries are aging badly because they don't really invite immigration or just aren't attractive. Russia's another country, but who wants to go to Russia? Not that many people are interested, but the fact that we attract young immigrants has kept our country from becoming aged out, so to speak.
hmm agreed.
So let me ask you about you're teaching. You teach at Chapman and you teach at Dartmouth, and your subject matter is writing, correct?
Yes, I teach creative writing.
Talk about what, I mean, there is the argument that a lot of people, you either get it or you don't. Um, Presumably, the people who come to your class are people who do get it. They recognize they get it, and they're trying to bone up on their skill level and experience. How do you teach creative writing? What are some of the tactics, or is there anything you tell your students on day one that kind of sets the frame?
Well, all good nonfiction uh, operates on two levels. There's the literal subject material, and then there's the larger subject that kind of floats above it, sort of like atmosphere over a planet. And sometimes you can see it. That is to say, sometimes it's named. Other times it's a little bit more invisible and a little harder to grasp. And understanding the ways that there's two pistons to this engine, I think is really key in making your nonfiction work.
What about now you're teaching at Chapman, but then you're also teaching at Dartmouth. Is that a virtual, or I mean, do you go to Hanover, New Hampshire, or do you teach virtually?
I used to go to Hanover. That's true, every summer, but that's a part of my bio that probably is in for some revision. We just had our second kid, and that's making it increasingly hard to justify being away for 3 months at a time. So I haven't been on the roster there since 2022, and I'm hoping to get there 2025, but we'll see. It's obviously not a decision I get to make on my own.
Gotcha. So, who are some of the? I'm curious as to who some of the authors are who inspired you, whether fictional, whether they're writing fiction or nonfiction. Were there people who inspired you maybe to get into journalism to begin with, or to make the decision to get into the book writing?
Sure. I already mentioned John Gunther. Um, let's see. As a kid, I used to watch Nightline. Remember Ted Koppel?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Boy, did I admire his interview style. To the point, unflappable. He had a certain kind of elan, the way that he would ask those questions. Um, um,
And that show came out. What was the big global or national event that was happening that
the Iran
launched it?
hostage
That's what it was, the
ordeal
Iran hostage crisis. And then it went on for decades. Yeah,
went
I
on for
agree with you
decades.
on with Ted Koppel. He did bring a certain style that was really appealing and really intelligent.
Hmm. Yeah. As for fiction, I like realism in nonfiction. I'll just mention two. The novelist Richard Ford was meaningful to me, as well as Joyce Carol Oates,
Joyce Carol Oates is on what, her 100th novel or so.
something
She
like that.
she is
Yeah.
so productive. It's almost insane. What are you looking forward to now? What are you working on now? Is it something you can talk about?
Sure. I've got a book coming out, fingers crossed, next year, about the effect of what are called contraband camps, what were called contraband camps. These are um, groups of formerly enslaved people who ran towards the lines of the Union Army in the opening days of the Civil War and created a massive challenge to the North in terms of how they viewed freed people and what they were going to do to have a permanent solution to the question of emancipation. I don't think this area has been studied nearly enough. I'm also working on that's all finished. It's just awaiting publication. I'm now working on a book about potential dam removal in the Southwest. How would it affect um, uh, ri landscapes and communities if we were to take out some of the dams that were erected potentially too hastily in the 20th century?
Now, dams tend to generate a lot of, I mean, a big percentage of our, not a majority percentage, but a big percentage of the electricity in the United States is generated by hydroelectric power. Um, what percentage of dams, do you have do most dams exist for that purpose, or are they put into place to create lakes and recreational opportunities and to protect certain areas?
Hydroelectric was always sort of an add-on. It's a minuscule level of the U.S. baseload. The major purpose of dams was water storage and flood control.
So the how serious is that being looked at in terms of, okay, well, what if we were to take these dams down? Is that it's a serious conversation these days, or is it one of those things that we're just not going to go back, and there may even be prohibitive costs involved. I don't know.
I think it should be a more serious conversation, and particularly in an era of greater strain on water supply, in an era where we have um, uh, an inability to predict future droughts. I think we need to seriously look at taking down some of these obsolete dams. We've seen successful examples of this in the Pacific Northwest for reasons having to do with fish habitat. I'm curious about what it would entail to restore free flowing rivers in some places where the rivers have not flowed in a long time. And would that actually be a benefit to the rest of the country to gradually phase out high moisture crops like hay and alfalfa, feed crops mainly, and take that out of the desert Southwest and maybe restore it to areas of greater moisture where it's, more appropriate.
Now, you have written about a variety of subjects, disparate subjects. What interests you? I mean, if you were to kind of round up, round it all up, and just say, when I think in terms of writing a book, a story, um, this is kind of the kind of overlay of what interests me.
I've never been successful at answering that question. It's a good question. I think um, a word you hear a lot in publishing is branding, right? What what's your specialty? What corner of the world of fact have you staked your flag out on? I've never been able to do that.
So you come across these subjects. It might be a conversation. You might be paying attention to the news. You learn about something. You're interested, and you decide, let's. Well, do you decide let's go, or do you go to your agent and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing? Is it saleable?
There's three questions that I think every author needs to ask before they start off on something like this. The first question is this really a book or is this a magazine article? I think we've all read books that probably shouldn't have been written or should have been written in much smaller form and put into a literary journal or perhaps a magazine of ideas, but probably do not deserve 80,000 words, 100,000 words. That's a very important question that needs to be asked at the get-go. The second question is, am I going to be comfortable marinating in this topic for a year and a half or 2 years where, I won't get sick of it, where I'll be, happy to chase this stuff down and that, there's a replenishing well of interest here? Or is this going to be something that I'm going to quickly grow tired of? Or God forbid, there's just not enough material here and I'm going to be chasing after scraps. Um, the third question is, this one is the hardest to determine. Does the universe really need this book? Is there a thirst for this in terms of it making a contribution? Is this going to be something that will be of benefit to the rest of the world? Or is this merely something that's there to flatter the author's ego? That they just want to be an author and it doesn't really matter what they're doing. We've all read books like that probably should not have been written because the universe really just didn't need the book. That had already been said before, or the subject was too thin, or the author's heart clearly was not into it for whatever reason. So those are the three questions I like to ask.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you tell your students that as well. And what do you see as the biggest issue when you're teaching students and you're looking at the writing, you give them their assignments and so on? What are maybe give us an issue or two or three that you think are that maybe the toughest for them to overcome, or the big kind of the biggest problems in achieving what they're looking to achieve?
Sure. Perfectionism is a killer. You got to give yourself permission to just be an okay writer. You know, not every sentence is going to be beautiful. Um, don't worry too much about impressing the reader. Just simply tell a story using simple subject verb sentences. In its own way, and as terrifying as it is, uh, AI is actually a pretty good prose stylist when it comes to simple, plain vanilla sentences. It's a good way to write. I don't love the coming AI revolution, but I do have to credit the men behind the screen for giving AI a readable kind of register.
Yeah, it is very straight ahead, no question about that. Um, Interesting. So um, how has your writing changed with age? Your writing and your interests, maybe they're interrelated, I would imagine. So how has your writing style or the way you approach writing and the things that you're interested in writing about changed as you've gotten older?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. Um, at least when it comes to myself, I will be reading the work of others and I'll think to myself, this is a young person's prose style. Um, and I mean that in both good and bad ways. Sometimes it can be um, uh, juvenile and undisciplined and trying too hard and full of flash that just isn't working. But sometimes there can be a vigor behind it and a limpidity, a fluidity with the language that just comes across as very youthful. And I'm not talking here about cultural references of the young. I'm just talking about um, a certain quality of it. Um, I I'm wondering how that's affected me. I've now been doing this for more than 30 years, and so you'd think that I would see a change the way that you see a change on your own face in the mirror in the mornings, right? I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, well, and it's probably so gradual. I think sometimes you look in the mirror, look at your own face, and we see that slow evolution. But the person who hasn't seen us for 10 or 20 years is like, whoa. I mean, they probably are going to be too kind to say, wow, you've aged quite a bit, pal. But it's such a gradual thing that when you're observing it, and then of course your writing style, your interests are going to gravitate probably fairly slowly. I don't think too many people have a revolutionary sort of sudden change unless there's some kind of trauma in their lives, a major loss or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, is there a subject that you have had in the back of your mind that you want to write about, but it's been just a timing issue, or there's some other impediment, but you still are thinking in terms of this is a subject I want to write about? Now, I might be asking a question. It's like, sure, Mike, but I don't want to tell you because people are going to jump the gun on me. But even if it exists, even if it does exist, if the answer is yes, I'd be curious to know what kind of impediments stand in the way.
Sure. Well, this summer I was going to go back to my dad's hometown in Kansas and write an essay about life in a small town. I've been going to this place as I don't want to say a tourist. That's not quite right because it's always been in the context of a family that's hailed from this town and people who knew my great grandfather and that sort of thing. Um, and I had meant to go out there this summer and just stay for about a week. But again, I'm a dad of young children, and the travel's been hard to arrange.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on the program. So again, the subject matter, it's far ranging, and you've been at it for quite a while. I also like obviously I was interested in that, but we've traveled some of the same territories and all. Appreciate your time and best of luck with your new projects.
Thanks, Mike. It's been good being here.